So awesome. Thank you all so much for joining. We really appreciate working with you and, of course, you taking the time to be here. I am Taylor Haas, President and Managing Broker of Colorado Realty and Property Management. And I'm really just going to kick things off and turn it over to our presenter today, Jason Cassidy. Jason is an award-winning residential real estate advisor, renovation expert, and rental property owner with over 20 years of experience in the Denver metro area. He specializes in helping property owners evaluate performance and make informed decisions aligned with their long-term financial goals. Through Sunstone Real Estate Services, Jason provides practical, data-driven insights to help clients navigate the changing market cycles with confidence. He was also previously a part of the Colorado Realty and Property Management team for 8 years and even served on our leadership team. So super excited to have him with us today. And as I'm sure you all saw, the goal for today is we're going to cover current housing and rental trends across the Front Range, key financial drivers impacting rental performance, when continuing to rent makes sense, when some owners begin considering sale, and strategies investors evaluate when selling. We'll also look at 2 real-world property examples to show how these decisions can vary depending on property and location. So of course, at any time, if you have a question, feel free to pop it into the Q&A and we'll make sure that Jason gets those addressed at some point. So with that being said, over to you.
Taylor, thank you so much. Good morning to all of you on the western side of the U.S. Good afternoon to all of you on the central and east coast, and to anybody who's tuning in from overseas. Thank you so much for making it over here to join us today. I'm Jason Cassidy, and Taylor, you're the best. I appreciate you putting together a great group of people today. Hopefully, I can provide some information and some clarity on changes in the Denver market specifically. It's a little bit different, looking at different locations throughout the United States. And Denver is a unique market. We're a favorable market in the U.S. As landlords. And in a lot of ways, we get a lot of positive things going for us. And today, I just want to kind of call out some of those things and also help, put us in our mindset to evaluate some of the changes that have taken place either personally in our lives or in the market or as it relates to our properties to economic impacts, all create a little bit of questioning on whether or not it still makes sense. When does it make sense to look more closely at our rental properties as an asset, and how do we keep this performance at its peak level? So that's what I'm here to try to help with today. I would love to answer questions from each of you if you have them, and I'd love to do that through the chat if possible. And I can absolutely, we've made enough time in this to answer questions at the end as well. So I'm here to help you. Grateful to Colorado Realty and Property Management for the opportunity to speak to all of you. Taylor, you're the best. Let's get started. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And hopefully everybody can see my screen at this point. I'll look for Taylor's communication. Thanks, Taylor. So evaluating front range rental properties, our outlook for 2026 and a little bit beyond, hopefully, without a crystal ball guarantee. We can look at past performance and some of the data that we have today to try to speculate on what may happen and how that can impact our properties and our income as landlords. But some of the main things that we should be covering today relates to the current housing state and the rental trends across the Front Range and these performance drivers that are impacting our cash flow, and asking ourselves the question, we have the time set aside today to start to evaluate things maybe on a little bit deeper level than we have in the past. We haven't needed to. We've had such great market conditions, but maybe it does make sense to consider whether renting or not renting should be part of our future plans, and what strategies can we implement currently today, and what can we look towards the future that help us make the best decision. So let's dive into it. Speaking a little bit about current trends across the Front Range, one of the biggest ones that we see are the cranes in the sky across the Mile High City. It's almost shocking sometimes to see so many cranes and so much continued development, and the apartment supply is certainly a big piece of that. And some of the conversions that we see from commercial office space into potential housing space in the downtown Denver market comes to mind. But the reality is that we've seen quite an apartment supply surplus. Over 17,000 units added in recent time. It's put quite a bit of pressure for condo and even some townhome owners as far as rent growth goes. It's a bit more challenging when people are offering low security deposits or move-in incentives, or they have new amenities or things like that. Trying to keep our property looking fresh, it becomes a challenge when you have so much new inventory. So what we're seeing right now is kind of a leveling trend in those numbers. We're not seeing as much of that growth as we did in the last few years. So hopefully we're seeing rents stabilize. And anytime that you have questions particular to rents, you know that you've got Colorado Realty and their support to provide more structured, more specific information for your properties. Um, but as investors, the investor pool used to be much stronger. I used to get a lot more phone calls from investors from all over the country and outside of the country asking about opportunities, asking about capitalization rates. And we haven't seen that much volume. And a lot of that has to drive around interest rates and the ability to borrow money and make properties cash flow. But statistically speaking, throughout December of 2025, multifamily sales you see 2.6 might look like a big number, 2.6 billion, but that's the second lowest recorded volume of new investor business in 10 years. So investors are a little bit shy on buying up rental properties. And so if we have a rental property that we're considering selling, I will say, and I'll say it probably later as well, selling an occupied property to investors that are looking for opportunities. I'll say that the opportunity, if you're an investor today that's considering picking up more properties, the best play sometimes is the equity play, where you're buying a property and you instantly have value because you bought at the right price. But if you're considering selling one of those properties today and it's tenant occupied, that could be a big challenge as far as trying to maximize your returns. So we'll speak a little bit more about that. The advertised asking rents in Denver fell 0.8 of a point on the last 3 months basis, and a 4.1% drop on Denver rents. I don't know if that is the case for all of us as investors. I know that for my Denver property, for example, I was able to, CRPM was able to keep Denver rents, right where they were. I know that changes property to property, but there are things we can do to our properties to ensure the highest rent rate possible. So, some of the key drivers of the housing market, some of these we know and we hear in the news headlines constantly. Mortgage rates and affordability continues to be a big one. The golden handcuffs, as some people call it. The ability to be able to make moves in this market is challenging if you're trying to borrow money. And the monthly payments as a result of these mortgage rates that are currently trending at about 6.3 to 6.5%, it creates 35 to 45% higher mortgage payments than we had just 4 years ago at the same price point. So it's impacting sales of properties, it's impacting the ability to buy more rental properties. And I don't know the answer to that one there. There's some bigger economic forces at play right now that are keeping people on the sidelines. And I will say those that are willing to be brave and venture out into making those purchases when they see markets, some opportunities out there to buy at a lower price than they have in the last few years, the ability to refinance those properties later. Some people are taking that bet, and I know people that did that during some scary moments in 2020 that are sure glad that they did. So, risk and reward go hand in hand in this business. Inventory levels. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but it's segment specific and it's super specific to the type of property that you have. So we can give some market data related generally to the Denver metro area for days on market and for the amount of time that it takes to get a property under contract. But generally speaking, listing activity and listing volume is way up if you look year over year. So it's starting to give buyers more leverage than they've had in the past. Some of this is specific to the type of property that you're trying to sell or trying to buy, but I'd say there's more leverage for buyers than there has been in the last 17 years, not just from 2019. Job and population growth is certainly an impact economically and kind of is going to have a bearing on the next 36 months in our market in Colorado. Job or population growth has slowed considerably due to affordability. And I think we're down significantly, it says, to pre-2020 migration trends. Looking at those reports from 30 years ago, I've lived in Colorado 33 years. Their expectations for growth have changed considerably now that we're one of the top 10 most expensive cities to be in. But great news as landlords, when you own property that's come up this much over time, it's a great position to be in a sense. Multifamily supply, we're looking at, it says 20,000 here. It said 17,000 in the earlier slide, but this is combining 2024 and 2025 data. Multifamily supply has given buyers the opportunity to use concessions to try to purchase property, and there's more rental competition due to that inventory than there was before. On the attached housing side, condo and townhome days on market is different than single family days on market. So on the sales side, 20 to 40% longer days on market than we've seen in years past. Affordability is a concern, and it brings up the question, well, affordability, well, aren't the townhomes and condos less expensive than single family homes? Why aren't those products moving faster? A lot of it is people trying to time the market. A lot of it is people trying to wait for interest rates to be better, think that property values are going to continue to go down, or some buyers' psychology that they'd rather wait instead of having, buying that first property and moving up. They're looking to buy that first home and stay in that first home for quite a long time. So condos and townhomes are a bit softer on the sale side, and it's taking a little bit longer for that to happen. And I apologize, I haven't had my chat up. I'm not sure. I'm not actually seeing the chat at this point. So I'm going to continue.
No, you're good. I'll
Uh,
let you know when you got a question.
oh, thank you so much, Taylor. I appreciate you. Okay, so the slide that I pulled up here is months of supply, one of the main data indicators that I look at as a realtor when we're evaluating properties and trying to figure out what the plan will be and how long it will take, and is this a buyer's or a seller's market is a big question. So I want to address that national averages and news reports will say that 6 to 7 months of inventory is what they consider a balanced market between buyers and sellers. So to explain that, if no homes went on the market tomorrow, and all of the existing inventory was sold off over time, 6 to 7 months is how long it would take to for all that inventory to be depleted. That would be a balanced market nationally, but Colorado, we've never seen those numbers. I mean, again, going back about 17 years, a balanced market in Colorado actually looks more like 3 to 4 months of inventory. So this particular slide, I kind of took a piece of, a market segment, townhomes and condos between 275 and $450,000 values. And looking over a 3 year period of time, we can see that the inventory, which used to favor sellers heavily in 2023 at less than 1 month of inventory, has grown 4.5 times. So at 4.5 times, between 4 and 5 months of inventory, statistically speaking, it is a buyer's market in Colorado. And there are some things that you can do to make your property a little bit more attractive with all that inventory. But realistically, if you're selling a condo or townhome, it's more challenging, and buyers do have a bit of the upper hand. Well, they think that they do. It just depends on, on how you strategize things, I should say. On single family residences, we don't see that growth quite as strong. So we're looking at between 400,000 and $600,000 single family homes. We started at 1 month of inventory back in 2023. We're sitting just below 3 months here. Um, and that's a much more balanced market. This is, market normalization. The things that we saw 2021 through 2023 weren't normal market conditions. This looks more like 2017, where things were, still moving along at a decent pace. We saw some appreciation on homes. We saw a little bit more average market conditions, and that's what we're returning to at this point in time. So I wouldn't say that it's significant. So one of the other market indicators that we look at is days in the MLS, because we want to know how long it would take potentially as landlords, if you have a vacant property and you want to get it sold, you don't want those additional expenses of vacancy and holding costs, things of that nature. What would it look like to sell a single family residence? The days on market average here, according to the Denver Metro Association of Realtors group, is 64 days on market. But I can tell you that this is really, really dependent on the property itself. So one thing to keep in mind is that if you have a property that's in a rental condition, maybe it's been a rental property for 10 years, and now you're in a position where it's time to sell it, and you don't have any choice but to sell it in its as-is condition. These days in the MLS numbers could be even greater. It's much more challenging for buyers these days to figure out how to pay the down payment, pay their closing costs, and afford a property in Colorado, and then try to figure out how to make improvements on it so that they can have it the way that they want it. So turnkey properties, properties that are improved, newest, latest, and greatest features, or improvements to mechanical systems, new roofs, clean move-in ready properties can easily reduce their days on market, depending on what decisions you make about the condition of your property. So this number is an average. On the condo and townhome sign, again, showing that softer signs of the market here, looking like 73 days on market year over year, almost a 20% increase, due to a lot because of inventory. We see inventory levels increasing. Um, the the time that it takes to sell a condo or townhome, and the fact that I think nationally, almost 30% of transactions that went under contract fell out of contract for financing reasons. So sometimes the impact is related to appraised values on properties that maybe the other properties that have sold are taking, making it more difficult to sell your property at a premium. Days on market are impacted even more with condos and townhomes. And I made a note here to talk a little bit about the way that properties are sold as well. And let's look at the next slide for that. So this was kind of an annual review, part of a report. That's a 12-page report. There's some great data in here. And if you link up with me after the webinar, I'm happy to share this 12-page report. If you like the data, the analytical side, it speaks more to county growth, changes by county. It identifies some of the fastest moving markets in Denver. I'd be happy to share that with you. But as you can see, the increases in days in the MLS, over since 2020 have just continually grown. And really right here in 2023, where the interest rates changed, we saw some real changes. I know that things have moved fast. I know in my life since 2020, and it's easy to think that we're still similar in market conditions, but it's really important to point out that the market is not the same as it was even in 2023. There's a lot of changes, both on real estate valuations and in the rental market. But here's one thing I will say that's great about Colorado and the Denver metro area is that if we look at the median closed price, we see a lot of consistency and not a lot of change in values. Home values in Colorado have held really, really well. And one of the reasons is that we have a low foreclosure rate in Colorado compared to other national, states in the nation. The percentage of closed price to list price you can see here still maintains very, very high. People were selling obviously above and beyond their list prices in those peak years. But keeping close to 98% in a market that favors buyers is a great, great thing for people who do need to sell their properties. And the median close price, we've also been able to keep that high and actually keep, 1%, 2% growth in some of these Denver metro markets. How is that possible? Well, the main reason that this is happening is because of seller concessions. So what we're seeing is, if someone was to ask for, they were to make an offer on a property that was listed at 570,000, for example, and they made the offer at 550, they're able to reduce their mortgage payments some. Maybe it's 50 or $100, let's say. But if you instead negotiate ten to $20,000 in seller concessions, that allows buyers to reduce the interest rate effectively. And the formula for that is 1% of the loan amount gets you a quarter of an interest rate point reduction. So if you're at 6% today and you put $5,700 down towards your seller concessions, you can use that money to get your interest rate down to 6%. That's a bigger impact on your monthly payments, and maybe $150 to $200. So people are using seller concessions to negotiate more than they're using price. That's why we're seeing prices stay high, but we are seeing more of that negotiation take place there and then during inspection periods as well. Because a few years ago, people were doing crazy things like waiving inspections. That's not happening that way anymore. So. As far as long-term housing outlook, I don't have a crystal ball. Looking in the rearview mirror doesn't always indicate future performance, but I will say since attached properties, are at a surplus, They are more vulnerable than detached homes right now. The attached segment is the most soft segment in early 2006 that we've seen so far, and closings are trailing prior year levels more significantly than single family homes. So if you have a condo or a townhome, evaluate that situation a little bit more closely, whether you're planning to continue renting it or you're saying maybe I'm trying to figure out if it is the right time to sell, because this segment should be looked at on a micro level. You should be looking not only at how does my property compare to the other ones that have sold in that community, it should be what updates and improvements have been made that help me rise above and attract the highest percentage of potential buyers, grab the biggest market share there, and try to hold the value, keep the asking price and the sold price as close to each other as possible. But those evaluations don't just stop with, how much can I make? It's also evaluating, if you're in an attached property segment, what is the condition of that community? How well is that HOA managing this community? Have I looked at some of the tools that I can within my HOA recently? I know that I myself don't attend every board meeting for every HOA that I own property in, but it makes sense to start looking at those things well in advance, because this can have a big impact on the profit that you're making month after month when we see increases in homeowners insurance policies for HOAs, when we know that reserve studies show that communities are underfunded. These are things that you can look at ahead of time to determine, is this community the same as when I bought it 15 years ago or even 5 years ago? Should I be considering moving some of my, equity that I've earned into a product maybe that isn't subject to those changes, or things that are out of my control, like an HOA may present? The other piece of this here is it says Colorado's March 2006 economic forecast, relating to employment, which is a little bit slower than it was, and population growth a little bit slower than it was, means that things aren't going to move that fast this year. And the predictions that I would make is that we're going to have a pretty flat year. And we'd almost gotten to the point where interest rates dipped below 6%, and we saw a reaction in the market. It doesn't happen overnight. It usually happens over about a 3-month period. So expect that this doesn't happen instantly. But that change, there's a lot of people, I would say, that are sitting on the sidelines ready to make a move, and they're just waiting for that interest rate to get to the right point. So as we continue to see, economic growth in Colorado, which we're poised for growth in Colorado, it looks great. And population growth, I think the normalizing of this is what prices are in Colorado, I think it will continue to bring population growth. That's a personal opinion just based on living here and watching things that I watch. I would just say to owners that are, maybe not seeing as greater returns in year over year appreciation in their properties, hang in there, because, during the recession in 2008, some properties could be picked up for 40% less than they were just a few years before that. And, 20 years in the future here, it's just incredible to see the growth in values that we have. And holding real estate long term has always seemed to be a pretty good strategy for most homeowners. The just a side note, the one of the markets that I think underperformed to almost a wild degree is properties, condos in downtown in the 80202 zip code. I was looking at some recent sales from 2021, where properties are now selling for the same prices they were in 2021 today downtown. So I'm hoping for downtown to make a great comeback. There's some things that the Downtown Denver Partnership is doing, and we can talk about those in a sec. So, evaluating the property just a little bit further. So, think about your asset, think about what it means to you. Every one of us is in a different position with respect to our portfolio, to our goals and desires, whether it's a cash flow goal, earning additional, appreciation in the property value, or this is maybe a play on kind of like the succession plan that you have as an investor. Perhaps you're setting up for a 1031 exchange, and but perhaps you're putting the property in a trust and you're going to, leave it as part of your estate in the future. We're all in a different position on this. So, for now, all I can really do is speak a little bit in generalities, and I'd love to get more specific about property types or, investor strategies. But this is a very, very individual approach. And every conversation I've had in the last, 20 years in real estate relates more to the decisions that people are making in their lives than it does trying to time the market. I just I haven't been able to time the market most most brilliant people don't time the markets exactly right. So make the decisions that are best for you in your life, but do these things to try to evaluate your property and what the expectations will be. So if you've had a home in Colorado that's earned a lot of equity, you have a lot of equity in the property, I should say, you're in a great position. Does it make sense to sell? I'm not sure, but does that money make more sense to leverage it, to utilize it in other products? Maybe it's your opportunity to buy up and instead of having a condo or townhome, maybe it makes more sense to move into a single family product because you see the next 5 to 10 years being really strong. And I think Taylor would attest to the desire for people to rent single family properties is really strong, and we see improvements in real estate values in those segments as well. So if you have a great amount of equity, but you have a limited amount of cash flow or a slower appreciation cycle that we may expect in the next 3 years, maybe it is time to utilize that equity somehow. Maybe it means borrowing against it for to purchase another property and take some risk. Now's the time. Maybe it means moving the property into a different type of property segment. One that's a consideration. Selling could make more sense because of the costs that are rising extremely fast, it seems. So I have insurance listed first. Insurance certainly has had a big impact on things. We have hailstorms in Colorado. We have wildfires in Colorado. Insurance companies don't want to take on that risk without bringing us along with them. So if you're seeing that cutting into your profits, you're not alone. And taxes are the same. And in addition to taxes, I would say metro district taxes can be another one. If you're in a metro district, you should be watching a little bit of what's going on in there, similar to an HOA, because taxes in a metro district can change and it can rapidly escalate and change your cash flow position on your rental. Maintenance pressure is a frustration we all have as landlords. Thank goodness for our property management group to have great relationships with their vendors. Having trust with vendors helps reduce the pressure when it comes to managing maintenance items. However, the demand for high quality professional tradespeople is not just a Colorado issue; it's a national issue. The shortages that we have created increases in costs. And increased cost is not just from labor, but it's material costs as well, and the cost of gas and people trying to make it work on their end as well. So maintenance pressure could be to the tune of almost 30% in the last 5 years from what I've calculated. It's a heavy hit. So if you have a property in the next few years that's going to need a lot of maintenance, maybe you should be evaluating maybe taking the equity in your property and making a move with that to a different type of property that has a new life cycle. Taking maybe having a rental property that's 20 years old and moving that into through a 1031 exchange into a new community. It gives you a brand new depreciation schedule. It gives you a brand new life cycle where you can predict less maintenance, perhaps because you have new appliances and a new HVAC system. These are ways that you could maybe reduce the burden that we may feel as landlords when we get those work orders that are coming in. It also reduces a little bit of risk from a segment of warranty of habitability and providing housing for our residents. So, residents have the ability to call for alternative housing if we don't maintain our housing correctly anymore. There's some pretty strong regulations there that have been put in place in Colorado. So, keeping your property in great condition and avoiding those emergency calls is a great way to reduce your risk, keep the costs low, and plan and prepare just to do the best job that you can for yourself. If your property is in a more vulnerable segment, it could make more sense to sell. So condos, HOA heavy, the price sensitive nature of just all this inventory that we have, poorly run HOAs. There are things that we can do to forecast that. We may not be able to forecast the economy, but we can look at a reserve study. I say the word reserve study for those of you that don't know, because it's one of the most powerful tools you can use to evaluate your HOA. So a reserve study looks at all of the major components inside of an HOA community, like retaining walls and asphalt and siding, and they put that on a 30-year life schedule to determine whether or not it makes sense to budget for those items now, or they can wait a little bit later and take care of high priority items. So your HOA should be doing a reserve study more frequently than not. Hopefully they've got one that's at least within the last 5 years. But if you read that report, you can see the items that are called due. There's a zero lifeline left on that siding that has no paint on it, or the asphalt is starting to create cracks and that water is starting to flow towards a foundation. Well, everybody's going to be paying those special assessments if the HOA is not watching that and planning a budget based around a well created um, uh, not yeah reserve not reserve study, but yeah. Um, Anyhow, cash flow is negative or inconsistent. Well, this is a pretty quick indicator that maybe it makes more sense to sell a property. If you're in a negative cash flow position, it can create a lot of stress. Inconsistent cash flow is based usually on maintenance. We can evaluate these things on a case by case basis and look at those more closely as it relates to that particular asset and where you're trying to go as an investor to determine if it makes more sense to sell. If you wouldn't choose to buy this property again today, no, that doesn't mean the neighbors and I never got along and that barking dog. It means more of understanding the value of the real estate that you own. So if you wouldn't buy that property again today because you know that there's a factory around the corner that the wind blows and it creates a smell like the Purina dog chow factory off of I-70 did, then maybe seller or buyers aren't going to be as interested in that property either. And maybe you're going to get a lot of complaints from your tenants about conditions that are out of your control. If you knew that as a homeowner after you had the property and now you're renting the property, maybe you're evaluating your exit strategy today, even if it is 3 years down the road, because it may not be the perfect rental property. Some of us also, we make moves. You take a job somewhere else, and what was your home becomes your rental property. That's a big one. If you become what people call an accidental landlord in this market, um, maybe it wasn't set up from the beginning to be a rental property, and we're making it work. But I'm sure Taylor could provide some great solutions to either help the property become more profitable, or maybe this isn't the right property to begin with, and we should choose a better performing asset. So the goal of today's webinar isn't to talk about selling. It's actually, there's a lot of great reasons to continue renting in Colorado. But if you are on the fence or you are thinking maybe this is the right time to sell because of some of these things we've spoken about, it's important to try to align your renewals or a notice to vacate that you give to your residents with a peak selling season. If you can, have a vacant property in April through July, we see rental values at their peak during that part of the year. We see sales prices peak at that part of the year. And if you're getting ready to renew a lease, consider setting yourself up so that you can have the expiration of that lease or provide a notice to vacate in those months so that you're optimizing the peak pricing. Avoiding selling an occupied property. This is a big one. Investors, as we've talked about, are interested in instant equity. They're not interested as much in picking up property as they have been because of interest rates. So if you are in a position where you have to sell, selling a vacant property would be a much more advantageous way to go forward. Not to mention the marketing photos may not look as good as a staged property. Your opportunity to go in and make changes for maintenance or for improvements can occur with an occupied property, they can with a vacant. So, making these changes to your leases now so that you have a vacant property is a big strategy, I think, in 2026. Try to plan that strategy 12 months in advance and know that there are regulations in place that require a just cause notification to tenants. House Bill 1098 was introduced just a couple of years ago, but there's specific reasons why you are able to give notice to vacate in order to move forward to make a change with your property. I've outlined a few of them there. This also helps you strategize on repairs and improvements. One tool, just a really, really quick formula for those of us that like to try to calculate things. I didn't spend a lot of this webinar kind of preparing like deep data dives or, cross-examining, um, all of the different data sets that we could for our properties. But one of them is a rent to value ratio. That's a really quick calculation. And in comparison to other places, Colorado's rent to value ratio is typically between 0.4 and 0.6%. The calculation for that, if we had a rental property that was getting $2,500 a month and the value of that property was 425,000, we divide those and then multiply by 100 to get a 0.58 valuation. So if you're sitting in between that range, you're in the right range to keeping that rental property, it's a quick checkpoint. Other strategies and considerations to be evaluated are related to taxes. So consult with your accountant or your tax advisor. But two really, really helpful tools that I've seen investors use for many, many years now is the capital gains exemption. So if this was your home and you lived in that property for 2 years out of the past 5 year period, you're excluded from capital gains, which is usually at a minimum at 15% on the federal level. So a, a, a large, large savings up to $250,000 if you're filing single, or up to $500,000 if you're filing joint, that you could be exempt from when you sell. So that means you moved out of the property and you rented it and sold it up to 3 years from the time that you had moved out of it. That gives you some flexibility, but be aware of that because it's a significant amount of money that you could keep. Another one is the 1031 exchange. There's not enough information about how 1031 exchanges can be used. There's reverse 1031 exchanges. There's exchanges into land, into water rights, into commercial property, in state, out of state. Using a 1031 exchange to defer gains until a later time, maybe when you're retired, isn't financial advice today, but it's something for you to consider and look more into. There's a great group that does this, and they're backed by Fidelity, and it's IPX 1031. If you want contact information for IPX 1031, they can talk about all kinds of different 1031 exchanges, and that's a great way to take some equity to move up into the next segment of properties as an investor. There's even a couple of magic tricks. Ask me more about that if you have questions about 1031 exchanges. Okay, we're down to, it looks like, I think we've got some time left, so I'll continue at this point. Let's talk about continuing to rent, because most of us went into this with the anticipation of being landlords, staying landlords. And when does it make sense to stay a landlord? Well, your property is in a strong market segment. Let's start with the asset itself. So if you have a single family property, 3 beds, 2 baths, backyard, and a garage, that's the Colorado dream right there for so many people because they're putting their ski stuff in, the snow's not falling on them, the dog goes out the back door, they've got a home office. That's a strong market segment, I would say. And if you're within 30 minutes to 45 minutes of the downtown Denver area, or you're a few minutes away from Red Rocks, or you're close to that coffee shop around the corner, these are all things that drive value when it comes to being a landlord. So tenants appreciate what's in it for them now. They don't really necessarily care as much about a 90% efficiency furnace because they don't have to maintain and they don't understand the cost implication of that. But they sure love when they can walk out, they can walk the dog safely. The things that make single family homes popular continue to drive value, continue to drive home values as well. So when does it continue to rent make sense? Equity growth remains a primary return driver. What I'm trying to say there is that even if we're seeing 1 to 2% growth, if you look at the long term and you're in it for the long term, appreciation in property values, even at a 4% average, is a good return because you could consider that or compare that to other ways to invest your money, but you're also getting tax write-offs, you're also getting principal reduction on your loan. And maybe it's a home for you in the future. Real estate has multiple implications. It could be valuable to you in the long run, even if it's not necessarily performing to the best of its ability today. If cash flow is stable or improving or even modest, then you're doing all right. Some people I've spoken with in 2026 purchased that at close to a 6% rate. They're at a negative cash flow. So if you're in a positive cash flow situation, you've got a great interest rate on the property, you've owned it for years, and your principal reduction, is starting to actually like make an impact on what your payoff balance is. Those are all reasons that you're in the right place. Your loan position, exactly. Rents are holding steady relative to rising costs. Hopefully, that's the case for many of us. The long-term outlook supports continued demand in this property's location. Absolutely. There's a lot of changes that are taking place in Colorado. They have over the last 30 years that have made us a great city to invest in. But what I say here at the bottom, your path forward should be an intentional decision and not a passive decision. Just collecting rent every month and saying everything's okay is not a good approach. And it's an easy approach, especially when you have a great property management group that's taking care of things for you. but evaluate your situation now. Don't wait until later if the market changes. Don't wait until you know, somebody moves out unexpectedly and now all of a sudden you're rushed to make this decision. Start calculating things and have conversations with professionals that can evaluate all of the different targets that are moving that help us determine whether, you're making the right decision or not. It should be intentional. The Denver economy, this is kind of like another way of looking at what's coming and how will this impact the performance of our real estate assets. So one of my favorite ones, it's been talked about for a while, but it's getting closer to a new life is the Elitch Gardens amusement park area is a beautiful segment of property in downtown Denver. It's called the River Mile redevelopment project. Retail space, mixed use, residential, a full facelift is going to take place in that area. So if you own real estate, in that location, consider the implications of keeping that asset over the next 5 to 10 years. It really could be a whole different downtown that we experience. And knowing about what's happening not only locally in those communities, but also seeing large redevelopment projects like this, these are ways that you can evaluate the future potential of your assets. The National Western Center redevelopment project is a multi-billion dollar, you know, basically tear down and rebuild. There's some photographs that are online through denver.gov that show just kind of like a whole new area that looks really exciting that they're building. So transportation expansion, RTD is looking to take things all the way up to Longmont and through Boulder. And they've talked about what would it be like to have a rail system that goes all the way from Colorado Springs to Fort Collins. And we see more new development along that I-25 corridor. Those types of projects are the same ones that have made Denver great when they said, let's put an airport out in the middle of nowhere and then development's going to fill in around it. It created great economic conditions, um, downtown revitalization efforts, office to residential conversions. The 16th Street construction project after 7 years is now complete. Those are great improvements that our city continues to make that will help real estate values in the long run. So supply normalization, although multifamily is has a lot of competition right now, we're starting to see things taper, not as much apartment new construction. And so those slowdown in new starts should rebalance rents and stabilize investor confidence. An interest rate reduction would do that even more. So position yourselves now for what may come in the future. Another critical one, to build a booming economy is have energy and infrastructure along the Front Range. That's just kind of a natural thing that's taking place throughout the Front Range. Two of them that aren't on here. If you have property in Aurora, the Denver Air and Space Base, that employs over 12,000 people. It's one of the largest employers in the Denver metro area, and it serves all four military branches. If you're thinking about where do renters need to be and where do people, come and go quite a bit, that's one segment that you might have, consider strategizing. Buy investment property located near somewhere where a lot of people are coming and going and they're not going to plant roots because they may be, deployed or they may be relocated to another area. And then my favorite one that's not on here yet, but it's more of a newer development is the Denver Bronco facility. So the land purchase that was made, it's going to change the way that that area of Denver operates, the values. The excitement is high, especially after such a great season. If you own property in the Baker area or along that area of Osage and the light rail corridor, you should consider holding on to that property. If you're planning on selling it, let us know. To that point, location drives value, right? So there's a lot of things that you can do to keep an eye on your property to see what's changing in the area around me. The slide that you see right now is what's called Vibrant Denver, and it's a big project that makes improvements to transportation, to parks and rec, to facilities, housing, health and human services. This little map here, you can dial in a little bit closer on that. But if you own property in these areas, what's changing? Is there a new park that's being converted? Are they going to make some changes that help attract tenants, that help with the long-term real estate value? So what aspects of your rental property add or retract from its value? These are the things that are important to consider. And they change. I remember selling a property for some folks that were in the Central Park area. Their property at the time was the furthest east facing in Central Park. It backed up to open land. And 12 years later, they hadn't been back to the property. It had been professionally managed by CRPM. They were at the corner of a busy intersection at MLK and I think 32nd, and you could see the street light change color in the living room. That is a great example of waiting too long to evaluate what's changing in the community and affecting your asset. So here's another example of changes on the northern corridor, Brighton to Boulder. So Highway 7 improvements, multi-lane roads, bicycle access. It's certainly going to bring more business and it's certainly going to make transportation easier for people that are on the north corridor. If you own property in that area, be watching this project. This is going to impact value. One of my favorites, because it's near and dear to my heart, is changes to downtown Denver. I just wish and hope for a great revitalization to the downtown Denver area. And we're starting to see signs of progress. 16th Street being completed is helpful. Downtown Denver Partnership has $500 million that's been allocated to different projects in the downtown area. So the future looks bright, and seeing some of this information is helpful. The downtown weekday return to office activity is up. The highest return rate that they've seen in years is taking place, and pedestrian activity at an 84% recovery rate compared to 2019 levels shows us that we're on the right track.
Yes, and quick comment, Jason. We had a question on how does water supply look for the future and the impact on the market?
It's a coveted resource, and water rights live separate from land rights and real estate rights. So um, from a practical standpoint, the needs for water extend well beyond Colorado, and there are a lot of people depending on these water resources that go all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And how will how will those assets impact value? I think from a very localized level, they impact value on our front lawns because if you're not allowed to water your lawn, it may be time to make a change. And maybe if you have a quarter acre of grass on your lot as a landlord, maybe it's time to scale that back and create some xeriscaping. If you're speaking on more of a macro level, you know, companies like Coors that have a river that literally run into their facility, they're going to use up the water first, and they're going to leave the rest of us. But Taylor, would you ask me the question specifically one more time, just so I can try to key in on that a little more?
Of course, yes. The question was, what about water? How does water supply look for the future?
Hmm. Outside of that, I really couldn't say. We're at an unprecedented time in Colorado, and seeing like a 30% snowpack in some areas, I think that it's um it's something that everybody's taking a close look at now after seeing the fires in 2000, Christmas of 2021 in Superior and the Louisville area, I think that builders are doing more and regulations are higher than they've ever been to create fire safe areas, use materials in construction that make things safer in certain locations. So the lack of water availability is going to bring a higher awareness to good construction methodology, to creating safe spaces. And it's also going to increase insurance costs for people that live in mountain areas. If you're in Evergreen, Colorado, I presume that insurance costs have gone up considerably, whether you're in an HOA or if it's just for a single family home, because not just the cost of felling and removing trees affected by pine beetle kill that are a fire hazard, but that lack of water is impacting risk, and risk is impacting our returns from those standpoints.
Yes. And Jason can definitely deep dive that more. I think the specific question is more related to drinking water and the city of Denver's water supply. But I will say, unless Jason, you want to answer on that, we can definitely follow up.
So some of the established areas have an established agreement for water rights, but the ones that are impacted more so are people that are purchasing land in areas where the water hasn't been high needs until a development comes in. And part of the way that they pay for that is through water taps. So a water tap in an area that has low access to water could be 3 times higher than one that has an established, source of water. So when you're looking to purchase a property that that is in a newer development that could be built into the Metro District taxes. So you could try to find fees that are hiding there. With relationship to drinking water, it'll be very specific to that location. So, kind of summarizing things, best practices for landlords. When is it time to hold? Well, if you have a strong location, they're not building Red Roxes everywhere in the city. So if you got one that's a few minutes away by Uber, you have something that creates value for your property. Remember that those park locations can't easily be replicated by new development projects. And if you're in an established area with beautiful landscaping, or it's close to three parks, or that walk to the coffee shop, those kind of things really do create a strong position for you as a homeowner. So consider holding those kind of properties because they're very valuable. If you can find ways to improve your cash flow, then that's another reason why you can make your asset perform even better. There are ways to do that, and improving your property has always been a great one. It attracts a higher percentage of tenants. The improvements that you make can be paid for essentially by the increase in rent. And hopefully, what you're doing is you're attracting tenants that don't just look for the lowest price in rent. They're looking for a home that they love and that they want to keep nice, and they're willing to pay more for it because you've done more to improve it. So the strategy works hand in hand. If you have a low management burden, well, we have CRPM on our side, so always helpful to know that we don't have to figure all this out on our own, and keeping a good property manager is worth its weight in gold. Confidence in future demand. Well, we've talked about a few different ways that the Denver economy and the outlook that we have for the future of the city looks really, really bright. Um, I'm betting on it at this point in time. So consider selling if you have high equity and low yield, increased expenses, you're in a weak market segment, or you're in a property that's changed from the time that you've owned it, or if you're relying on appreciation alone in a market that probably isn't going to produce a ton of appreciation in the next few years. Reinvesting, if you want to stay in real estate, you're ready to buy up. Well, prices have come down a little bit in some segments. Maybe it's the opportunity for you to go from a one bath property that, a three bath or a three bedroom, one bath property doesn't bring the same amount of, activity and desire as a three bedroom, two bath property. Simple example. Or no parking in an area that's down in the city compared to having a parking space. Huge difference in performance when it comes to trying to get that property rented out. So if you have a property that's facing some of those things, you can make changes, stay a landlord, and set yourself up for success in the future. What else can you do? We've talked about this a little bit. Know your HOA. Check out their reserve study. Find out if there are special assessments because the budget hasn't allocated things correctly. Determine if your master insurance policy covers losses that could be significant to the financial health of that HOA. Set aside a percentage of your rental income. How many of us do this, or versus just cashing the check and moving on? It's important to have some money set aside in case of emergencies, from a warranty of habitability standpoint to just preparing to make improvements that attract tenants to your property. Cover your assets. Plan for maintenance and upkeep of critical systems and expensive items. That doesn't mean wait till it breaks. That means do more proactively so it doesn't cost you and cost you the stress and cost you the time in an emergency situation where all of a sudden you're scrambling trying to figure out how to fix that furnace in the winter. You know, it's not just a property management company's responsibility to think about some of these things. This is your asset. I will say that as a landlord, I have to take a proactive approach to look at my HOA more carefully. I need to know what's going on from that standpoint. And it's important for me to think, I should, I should make sure that those downspouts, let me follow up and just ask to make sure the downspouts are in place before the winter, or the gutters are clean. CRPM does so many of these things for us, but just like we would do at our homes, an example would be landscaping. I see a lot of properties suffer from landscaping trouble, as a rental property. But at my home, I seed and I aerate and I do some things that are proactive that cost me a little bit more to keep my lawn in great shape. And that's not something that is expected from a tenant. They're expected to clean up the leaves, but doing a little bit above and beyond on that proactive maintenance makes a big difference compared to paying the cost of new landscaping when that property is vacant. So it's a consideration that you're probably already aware of, but these are things that are just practical applications of doing the right thing and protecting your asset. You've you've got to own it. It is yours. So um, the final one here, breaking down your return, understanding whether this is a play on appreciation, this is a cash flow play. Are there tax benefits that I'm utilizing here? Am I planning to exit in 5 years? What's driving the performance of this asset? Or is it just something that's, gosh, I got a renter in there and I'm going to figure this out later? Take a proactive approach. We are here to help you either from the real estate side, from the management side. There's a lot of things that we can do to help you prepare, create value, unlock hidden value. That takes me to the end of the slides. I want to thank all of you for attending, for hearing some of the points that I've made. I hope I've made good use of your time. There are ways to contact me here. I am happy to send out that 12-page market report from 2025 if you're interested in more data. If most importantly, if you like more information, I like to get specific on properties because it really starts to tell you more about the best decision to make. These can't be determined in generalities in just one webinar. So there's no obligations to contact me and ask me for more information. Data is very easy for me to attain, but evaluating the data and understanding what is most important from all of this data is how you come to make some great decisions. And that's what experts do to help you be more successful. So I really, really appreciate you hearing me all this time. I hope it's been valuable for you. Happy to take any questions too.
Yes, let's see here. We did get a question that was market specific on if you had any thoughts regarding the Stapleton area specifically.
Yeah, I think that Central Park has been super popular for such a long time because it's central in the Denver area, and the park space that they created when they redeveloped it um, has been a big draw because almost 70% of people that live in that area have pets. People that are coming to Denver for the first time, there's some very affordable segments to get into in that area, and then there's some very opulent properties and beautiful real estate that exists in that area too. So it creates a great community from a sense of kind of encapsulating all of what Denver has to offer. It's closer to the airport than some of the west-facing parts of the city, and the urban density is pretty high. So if you're someone who's renting property, there's a little bit more competition sometimes in segments like that. So um, generally speaking, properties that perform well in that area are going to be the 3 bedroom, 2 bath that accommodate a lot of different needs for different types of tenants. That could be for people that are sharing rent. That could be for an empty nester. That could be for a family just getting their start. When you have an asset like that in a location that performs well, it's a great combination.
Absolutely. And then we also got a question about what are your thoughts on the Colorado Springs area?
Colorado Springs is a cool area. I'll just speak personally for a second. If you go down there, there's so much to do. Affordability isn't what it used to be. And I think that the military presence that's down there creates great opportunities for rental housing investing. And I think that in some ways, it's comparable to Denver rents, but what I would say is for the nominal amount of money more that it costs to buy in the Denver metro area, the economy surrounding the Denver metro area is so much stronger. You're going to have more potential tenants, more that have employment opportunities in Denver than you have in the Springs. So if I'm spending close to equal money, I'm choosing Denver metro.
Absolutely. Any other questions, anybody? Oh man, everybody wants to know your thought on every city we've got here. We got
Yeah,
Westminster now. Let's
cool.
hear it.
Westminster's changed a lot. The Thornton, Westminster, North Glen areas have changed a ton. And so the rent ranges, particularly in the last few years, have come up so much that that's a great reason to keep real estate there. What I'll say is sometimes what comes up comes back down, but not in a rent standpoint. What I mean is in a real estate standpoint. So any areas of saturation, Westminster has quite a bit of new development. So if the developments get so big, that you go to sell a property and there's 12 other properties that are just like yours, you're kind of at the mercy of the motivations of those other sellers. So the play on that is to make cash in the meantime. If this property is performing well in a rental standpoint, then it's great. The proximity to the city to downtown Denver, if you're between, 104th, 120th, those areas there, and the light rail corridor that's coming up to that area, I think Westminster's got a promising future to it because it's within the city center, what I'd consider that 30-minute commute. So I like it a lot for those reasons. And the cost of buying housing in those areas is a little bit lower than it would be in Denver proper or, Littleton or Arvada. So I think Westminster is a smart approach.
And last but not least, Erie.
Erie. Um, okay, I'm gonna pick on Erie just a little bit because there's so many cool things about living in Colorado as far as what the location offers you in lifestyle. So if you want more house for your money, I think that's why you move to Erie. You want something brand new, you don't mind having a smaller yard, and you're gonna travel a little bit further. So I think Erie is more popular for people that are new to Colorado than I think the people that have lived here a long time. If I was in Broomfield, then I know I'm a few minutes from Boulder, I'm a couple minutes to Superior, the trail systems, the beauty of the Rocky Mountains, all those things to me that drive value living in Colorado, I would pick somewhere else besides Erie. But there's value to it because the I-25 corridor is improving rapidly. I think Erie was a better play. Obviously, everything was a better play 3 to 5 years ago, but the prices that they're paying, that you're spending in Erie, I might go with less house and try to improve location as a strategy.
Perfect. Any other questions, anyone? Well, while people are typing those in, I will say Jason made great comments about, property segment type of condo versus single family home. We as a company on a monthly basis track average days on market per property type. So single family home, condo, townhome. And that's definitely information we can share with you. But we do typically find that, condos require a little extra love. They're typically anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks longer on the market than a single family home. And with a single family home, you're getting every possible renter segment, a single person, a couple, a family, a roommate situation. So we love those. And, condos and townhomes are great too. We just always encourage you to have more than just one bedroom. That way you can appeal to a larger segment as well. And then with that as well, we, as you guys know, do our renewal process very early. We start that process at least 120 days before the lease expires. So, of course, I encourage you to reach out to Jason now, but we will reach out to you when your lease is coming up. So you can always, again, have those conversations when that time comes too. Okay, one question we got was, what would you advise to improve upon a property with a single family rental home in Aurora with an enormous yard in the front and back?
Yes, with the shortages of water that we're going to be seeing and the the desire that people have to have a large yard is always there. The desire to keep up with the yard can be a different situation. So even if you can start xeriscaping at the corners, rounding off the yard and saying, "Yep, we're just going to put some edging in here, and we're not going to use the red mulch. We're going to use the brown mulch always because that looks better in photographs," and just start to taper off the amount of needs and requirements in those areas, specifically at the perimeter. At the perimeter, it's helpful because that's usually where things start to die and start to look shabby anyway. So if you're cutting corners literally as you start to approach xeriscaping, it makes sense. Choosing more drought tolerant type plants, those high grasses can create privacy. They actually can reduce sound if you've got enough of them. Junipers grow really, really fast. So instead of having that grass area, maybe you're creating a large round radius around it, putting the mulch in there, which helps keep moisture in that area for that young tree to grow. And then things like linden trees or a silver maple or a juniper, they can grow a little bit faster. They can provide shade, which helps the grass stay growing. So strategically adding those kind of elements can help the existing elements stay alive longer.
Our team is definitely happy to get estimates for quotes or for things like that so that you can review quotes. Similarly, Jason mentioned like fertilizing and aerating and things like that. We do always reach out with recommendations for seasonal maintenance when that time of year comes, like cleaning your gutters, stuff like that that needs to be done. That, yes, Jason hit it on the head, tenants don't do, but if you don't do it, it can be very costly later. So our team is happy to help there. Let's see, we got another question. Living abroad, would it be possible to reach out to our management team to study and advise us?
Absolutely. Many of CRPM clients have moved abroad. I've done sales for people that live out of the country. There's great ways to communicate, whether it's on the rental side and speaking with Taylor and the CRPM team, or myself trying to understand market values and trying to assess whether it makes sense to keep that property if you're going to stay abroad, for example. We can most certainly accommodate that. I've used WhatsApp many times for real estate transactions, if that answers your question.
Absolutely. Well, we are 5 minutes over. Like I said, I will send this recording out. You hopefully snag Jason's contact info. If you did not, you're welcome to reach out to me and I will connect the two of you. And it, of course, will be in the recording. So if there's anything that I or Jason can do to help, just let us know. But thank you so much. Oh, yes, Jason, there was a question if you could just share your screen with the contact info again one last time.
Most certainly.
Um, but yes, reach out. We are happy to help. Thank you so much for joining us. If you got a lot of value out of this, let us know. This is the first time we've ever done this kind of on a broad scale. And I know and I would both be happy to do this more often. So let us know what you think. Here is the contact info, and we'll see you next time.
It'd be a pleasure. I will say that it's great to get more dialed in specifically to properties because that specific information it really goes a long way. So some of the information today had to kind of be catered to the whole Denver metro, but what we're seeing in the economy in Denver is micro markets, big changes to some areas more so than others. Taylor sees it on the rent side. So let's get specific for your property and let's communicate and see what we can do to help you evaluate that.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for attending. See you next time.